July was such a weird reading month. I had lots of highs, but also lots of lows, and I actually was in a semi-reading slump at the end of July, so let's talk about it. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. My name is Caroline, and I am currently a full-time research student on campus, but also somebody who just loves books, loves reading, also loves content creation. So my entire personality trait is just like trying to fit reading and content creation into my very busy and hectic schedule. Welcome back to our monthly reading wrap up. In this video, I'm going to share with you all of the books that I read and also DNF'd in the month of July. It was a very good reading month in my opinion. I read a lot more books than I expected, so let's get straight into talking about it. The first book that we finished in the month of July was The Games Gods Play, and I gave that book a 3.5 star. It is the first book in an incomplete series, and I think book 2 is coming out later in the year. This book basically follows Lyra Karis, and Lyra Karis, she is a member of the Den of Thieves. She's actually one of the orphans, and she works for them as this kind of clerk woman, is basically managing their finances, things like that. In the world that they live in, they have the mortals, the human beings, but also the Greek gods and goddesses. It's a Greek mythology inspired story, fantasy. There's something called the Crucible, and the Crucible is like a competition that happens every 100 years where the gods and the goddesses, they participate in this crucible to figure out who wins the trials. It's like Hunger Games-esque, and whoever wins the trials gets to be the kings of the gods for the next 100 years. But the thing is, the gods and the goddesses, they don't participate in the crucible themselves. Instead, they pick one mortal human being to fight in these games in their place. Obviously, these games are deadly. They obviously can kill people. Whichever mortal human being wins obviously gets the blessings. I think they get to live longer than normal human beings are. Whoever doesn't win, obviously, you either get killed or something happens to you that you're like unalived. Even those who don't win, their families gets blessings. So it's like a win-win situation that these people view them to be win-win. I don't see them to be win-win situation. Every single year before this year, Hades doesn't participate. Like, he never participates in any game whatsoever. Any crucible, he's never present. That is good for the other gods and the goddesses because Hades is already the king of the underworld. If he participates and he wins, he would have too much power. And the other gods and the goddesses, they don't like that. But then things change because this year Hades decided to participate in the game, and he chose Lyra Karis to fight in his honor, which is like absolutely insane because A, she is just an ordinary person, and B, she has never been trained for one day in her entire life. So that's where things reveal, and obviously the love interest is Hades. It was a very fun time, I do have to say, although I do want to say that I think Lyra Karis is a bit too perfect, and some things just don't make sense. How even though she's never been trained, she's not even like built like muscular wise, or like her body type, she's very small and teeny tiny compared to the other tributes, but she somehow beat them in all of the games. So I don't see much of a character development and arc in the story in terms of Lyra Karis as a character. Next, we finished one of the more disappointing reads of the month, and that was Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, the newest release by V. Schwab, and I gave this book a 3 star. There's been mixed reviews and mixed thoughts about this book. I am of the opinion that nothing happens in this book because even though we follow 3 people and the book is rather thick, I don't understand and I don't resonate with either of the characters. Maria, or Sabine, she is just like such a evil person. I could see why she's like evil, but then the transition between her being very feminist and, you know, wanting to take control back over her life to her becoming absolutely malicious and evil, I don't see that to be very clear. And then Charlotte, okay, her story I think is the most developed out of the three and is the most central to the plot. Even that there are certain flaws in her personalities that I just don't agree with. And then the last character that we follow was Alice. And Alice is the modern day kind of vampire. She is the character that I don't understand the most because she starts off at this very innocent and very, I would say, morally layered and morally conscious person out of the three. But then at the end, she also becomes evil, which I don't see where that comes from. It is a gothic kind of vampire toxic lesbian relationship story, and I expected more from that. I expected something that's like not groundbreaking, but at least attempting to dig deeper into the toxic lesbian relationship and pushing back the boundaries and the stereotypes that people usually associate with lesbian relationship. I watched Elizabeth's deep dive analysis into Burial Bones in the Midnight Soil, and I really enjoyed that. And some of the points that she brought up was very interesting about how this book kind of reinforces certain negative stereotypes and misconceptions about queer people. So if you're interested, then please go check her video out. It's like very well done, and I learned a lot about this book that I didn't notice before. So that's Burial Bones in the Midnight Soil, a rather disappointing read, but I digress. Next, I cracked open one of the project books of the summer, which was Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, and this I gave a 4-star. I think it was solid, it was good, it was insightful. There were lots of commentaries on society, on class, wealth, manners, on love, marriage, on motherhood, on farming, even art, like ancient versus contemporary art. This question of what does it feel like or what does it take to be a human being. So sort of a existential crisis at the end of the book. This book follows two characters. We follow Anna Karenina, whose name is the title of the book, but also we follow more, I think, is Konstantin Levin. I personally like Levin more than Anna Karenina. I feel like Anna Karenina is a selfish person. She does not care about other people's interests, even her son's interests. She kind of overlooks and chooses her own interests. And I know there's a fine line between balancing like your interests as a woman and as a mother with your children's interests, but I feel like she just like focuses on her own intentions and interests. The book opens with we learning about a love affair that happens between Anna Karenina's brother and his wife, so her sister-in-law. And Anna, by her coming to stay with them for a couple of days, she helps them resolve their conflict and argument. But then obviously when you're dealing with a love affair and a betrayal, even though on the surface things seem to be resolved, but you know underneath that you can never be with that person anymore, there's this very interesting conflict in terms of emotions and, you know, obligation as a mother her brother's wife kind of has to deal with. And then the book kind of moves on talking about Anna having her own love affair and cheating on her husband essentially. And one thing about her husband, Alexei Alexandrovich, I feel pity for him because this society is very weird in that if a man has interest in married woman, they were praised and society doesn't hold them accountable. Society doesn't even punish them, whatever. It's viewed as something that's like worth celebrating. But then the husband of the wife that cheats or that betrays is looked down upon. People just like outwardly treated him differently after the affair, which I thought was very interesting and, you know, kind of speaks volume about the society at large. And I did notice some similarities between this society in Russia in the late 18th century with some of the society that I read in British literature. Anyway, it's just like a lot of things being dropped into this novel that I feel like it should be read. And I know it looks to be very intimidating, and it is in fact quite hard at times to read, but I think at the end it's just like such a beautiful and raw and real exploration of the human experiences and human consequences of their actions. So that's Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I read Say You Remember Me by Abby Jimenez, and I loved this book. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars. This is the long distance relationship story that I was interested to read from, because I've never read a romance that's like long distance. So this book is about Xavier and Samantha. Xavier is a vet. The reason why they come to know each other is that Samantha brought a kitten that she rescued to Xavier's vet. When Xavier took a diagnosis of this kitten, he was like, it cannot be saved. There's no point in trying to save it. You should put it down. Which Samantha was like, how could you say that to me when you're a vet, when your entire purpose is trying to save these poor creatures and animals? They kind of hit it off, but not on a good, positive terms. But somehow at the end of the session, he asked her to go on a date. I don't know how they ended up going on a date, but they did. That date ended up becoming one of the most electrifying, intense, lots of different emotions going on date ever. Exactly at that time when they figured out that, oh, this might be my soulmate, the next day Samantha decided to fly across half the country to move back to California to take care of her mother who has dementia. So there's a lot of mention of dementia, so if that's something that you're triggered by, I don't recommend reading this book. But I truly appreciate how the romantic aspect is just like one topics that are being discussed. There are also mention of relationship, like familial relationship, and how dementia and other disorders kind of heal, but also can break the family subunit. And then just like portraying Xavier as this provider and protector and somebody who's willing to do everything that he can to make sure that he provides for her, make sure that they make this work, is such a refreshing and I think a much needed perspective on masculinity and relationship at a whole. And I thought I really enjoyed this. Is such a wholesome read and a great palate cleanser after reading Anna Karenina. The next thing that I did, because why not, was I decided to do another 24-hour readathon, and the video is already up on my YouTube channel, so go check it out. But I read 4 books in this 24-hour readathon, and I really enjoyed doing this. The first book that I listened to in terms of audiobooks during this readathon was Trial of the Sun Queen. I actually went on a craze for this entire series and I finished 3 books. I finished Trial of the Sun Queen, that was 2.75 stars. I also finished Rule of the Aurora King, that was 4.25 stars. I also read or listened to Fate of the Sun King, 4.25 stars. And then I'm in the middle of reading Tale of the Heart Queen, the 4th and final book. This series is just a very, I think, underrated series in my opinion. It is such complex and nuanced, and I feel like every book just keeps getting better and better. It is such torturously slow romantasy. It was like they did not do the deed until the 3rd book. One thing that helps with it being very slow is that the romantic aspect is not the only thing that is being mentioned. There are other things going on in this realm of Uranus that you have to really pay attention to. Each of the character has their own different POVs, so it's a multi-POV series. Basically what this series is about is we follow Lore, our main female character. When she was a child, she was basically thrown into this place called Nostraza. And Nostraza is the worst prison in the entire realm of Uranus, and she was thrown into this prison with her 2 siblings, Willow and Tristan, and they had to endure 10 plus years in this prison. Their living conditions were like literally trash. They did not have even a bar of soap to properly shower. One time she got into trouble and she was sentenced to 2 weeks in something called the Hollow. The Hollow is this kind of dark, mysterious, dangerous forest, and when you are sentenced to this place, you don't have food, you don't have water, you don't have nothing. She was sentenced to for 2 weeks, which is like the longest time that anybody has been sentenced to being in the Hollow. But then as she was like trying to make her way through this 2 weeks period, one day she woke up and she was actually kidnapped by the king of the neighboring country, which is like Aphelion. And basically the reason why she was being kidnapped to this Aphelion state was because there's this Trial of the Sun Queen going on and everybody has to participate. So she was forced to participate in these trials. Whoever wins the trials can marry the Sun King. So that's where things unfold, and that's where she got kind of dragged into the politics of this realm of Uranus. A very interesting series. The next book that I read as a palate cleanser after finishing 3 books was The 50-Year Sword by Mark Danielewski. Mark Danielewski is the person who wrote House of Leaves, and House of Leaves is the weirdest book that I've ever read so far in my reading journey. The 50-Year Sword also is very weird. The format of it was very weird. When I looked at it, it looked to be like an epic poem, but in fact it is a novel, and that was what caught my eye in the beginning. And this story is about Chintana, who is the seamstress, the local seamstress. Chintana was invited to this Halloween party. When she arrived at this Halloween party, she was assigned with being the chaperone for 5 orphan kids at this Halloween party. You know, as kids, they act like every other kid would, which is to not behave. So she found them to be very, very, very hard to manage, even with a promise of a cake and a storyteller. And this storyteller is no ordinary person. He is very dark. He looks to be very dark, but internally he also is very dark and twisted. He tells a story of vengeance and revenge and just like violence to the children. We learn about how he comes into possession of this 50-year sword, and to make matters worse, at his feet there's a box that has 5 latches, and before you know it, curiosity gets the best of the children and they each start to lift one of the latches. That's where the story ends. You have to find out how we get there. We finished the readathon with reading Anne of Green Gables by Montgomery, and this was a 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was one of the most comforting and wholesome reads ever. I just love Anne with an E, and her characteristics and personalities are just like optimistic and just like very contagious and infectious, and I really, really like her. Although this is like a very comforting read, there is a surprising commentary on feminism and patriarchy and just like sexism as a whole that I did not see coming. So that was surprisingly more nuanced and more complex than I thought, and I'm now ready to continue the series. I just cannot wait to read more and know more of Anne of Green Gables. Moving forward, we read Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, and I gave that book a 3.75 stars. This is such an interesting read. It is about 2 writers competing to write the biography of Margaret, which is like one of the biggest, the most famous celebrities in this world that they live in. They each have this 1-month trial period where they would take turns inviting her, and then they would write up a draft about her story, about her life, about Margaret's experiences as being in the limelight. She would pick out who will work with her moving forward. This story takes such an unexpected turn that I was like, where did that even come from? But I really enjoyed learning about Margaret's experiences and her life, but I also enjoy more about the romance. It was just like such a wholesome romance, and also a little bit spicier than I expected. The next book that I read was an arc that was given to me, and it was The Book of Lost Hour, and I gave that book a 3.75 star. This is such an easy to read book. I think if you're somebody who's like interested in getting into fantasy and would love to have a great beginner book in terms of fantasy, this is it. It was so easy to read. The world was still very complex, but it's very real, and it's like something that makes sense. You know what I mean? It is a story about timekeepers, and timekeepers are somebody who can access and, you know, travel through time. They can access a place called the time space, and in this time space, that's where all the memories ever created are stored in the forms of books. What timekeepers can do is that they can move into and from this time space, and they could change and erase or add more memories, and eventually changing the past and changing the present because of that. It's set in the real world, the world that we live in, and each of the country has their own little organization of timekeepers. Each country wants to make their country look to be very superior, so they want to kind of eradicate or falsify or modify the memories accordingly to make their country looks more superior, looks more pure, looks just like overall better. We follow two characters, Amelia and Elizabeth. Elizabeth, she is the daughter of a clock or a watchmaker. Every single night before going to bed, Elizabeth's father has to tell her a story, and she loves just like stories and tales. And in the middle of telling the story, there was a loud banging at the door. Her father was like, someone's coming. Something's dangerous coming, and I need you to go to the time space. And he basically locks her up in the time space, and he told her, stay here, I'm gonna come back and get you and we can get out of here. But he never comes back. And so Elizabeth, she spends most of her life living in this time space, growing up in this time space, learning all the rules to this time space, and that's where she learns lots of unique gifts and abilities to maneuver the time space. And then another person that we follow is Amelia, and Amelia is the niece of one of the timekeepers in the US. Somehow their stories kind of collide with one another. I really enjoyed this book. It's the Book of Lost Hours. Next, I was challenging myself to reading more nonfiction, and I read The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And this is one of the most, if not the most important books that I think everybody should read. It talks about trauma and how trauma is related to the mind, the brain, the physical and emotional bodies. Trauma can be stored in your bodies. He also mentioned the different ways that we could fix the root cause, target the problem, and kind of reincorporate the traumatic experience in the traumatic memories and reinterpret these memories. When I was reading this book, I actually had a bodily reaction or a panic attack. And that's when I realized that I still have some problems going on that I often overlook and I thought was resolved, but in fact it's not resolved. It also gives a lot of techniques and approaches, and one of those ways was yoga. He talks about alpha theta training, which is like training the alpha waves in your brain to help you be more in a relaxed state. He also talks about EMDR, which is like a rapid eye movement that mimics the rapid eye movement when you're deep sleeping or when you're in REM sleep cycle, which I thought was also interesting. He also talks about using theater to kind of restructure and reconstruct the 3D, three-dimensional reality of your traumatic experiences, and that can help you once again reinterpret those experiences and place them exactly where they are, which is in the past. I think you should definitely read that book, no matter who you are, no matter what your experiences are. I think it's one of those books that should be a classic and should be a required reading in every single school or institution that deals with children or the youth, adolescents in general. The next book that we read or did not finish is We Are Never Meeting in Real Life. This is a collection of essays and stories, and the reason why I DNF'd this book was because I appreciated how intimate and how personal the writing style is. But because the author experiences and my experiences are very much different from one another. She is a black woman living in the United States, I think in the 80s, 70s, 90s, 2000s, but I am not that person. Her target audience is very niche, and so I did not get half of the references that she had, and I just could not wrap my head around how is that supposed to be relating to me, if that makes sense. Also, I was in a very weird spot where I did not feel like reading. I was in a semi-reading slump at this point in July, and so I did not feel like finishing this book, and so I thought, let's DNF it. But if you are interested, I would recommend. It was a very unique writing style and very, very open and very intimate and personal. I feel like at times that I'm on FaceTime with her, but unfortunately, I just did not stick all the way through. The last book that we read in July was From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and this is the first book in her series, and I really enjoyed it. When I was reading the first half of the book, I was still in that weird reading slump spot, and so I was a bit zoned out at the first half, but then the later half, I actually regained my momentum and really, really enjoyed this book. I give it a 3.5 star. Hear me out. I appreciate Poppy as a character, but I would have have loved to have this book and this series as a whole as a multi-POV format and layout, because I feel like her dialogues at times becomes a bit too much for me. And I also did not understand why she made certain decisions, and I just did not resonate with her on a deeper level, if that makes sense. And I would have loved for the romance to be a little bit slower, but I will be finishing the series. I'm actually reading A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire right now, the second book in the series, and I will report back to you when I finish that book. That's every book that I read in July, and the book I also DNF'd in July as well. It was, I think, 13 books read and 1 book that I DNF'd, which was amazing and so impressive. Like, I kid you not, I didn't think that I could even read 10 plus books in July because it was very much busy, but I feel like I am able to build this kind of routine for myself where I know how long it takes for me to finish a certain book, if that makes sense. But thank you for listening. I know that's a very long rant in terms of the books that I read, but let me know down in the comment section what you read in July and what you are planning to read in August. I have such an amazing lineup for August, and I'm so excited to be A, going back to school, but B, filming more content for you and having a more interesting life now that we have things going on actually, and then C, just to read lots of books. That are just like so many books but then just so little time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. If you like this video, please give me a like, give me a subscribe, give me a comment. Like I mentioned, what did you read in July? And then if you would like to support my channel and my videos, then I have a Ko-fi linked in the description. You can buy me a matcha, buy me a book, buy me a coffee, whatever you want to buy me. And thank you for supporting my channel. I'm gonna go cuddle up and read my book and drink my tea and watch the sunset. It is such a beautiful day. If you have not noticed, this is my new reading setup. I just moved, so that was very fun. Moving, unpacking, packing, and just like cleaning. It was just a lot, but I'm glad. I'm very happy actually with this lamp and this entire reading setup that I have. It's very cozy. Anyway, that's a very side tangent, but thank you for listening. Thank you, and I'm gonna be seeing you very soon with another episode. And until then, bye bye. Happy reading.